How Easy You Are to Need by Delimeful. Chapter 2. Spring. Virgil woke up surrounded by warmth and the smell of sugar. It was nice for the few moments it took him to realize where he was and what had happened to get him there. He peeled his eyes open, ignoring the way his whole face felt like a bruise, and found himself in a small living room, propped up by a bunch of pillows and nearly smothered in blankets. His gaze darted around, uncomprehending. He'd expected a cell at best. Really, he hadn't expected to wake up at all. What possible reason could these people have for keeping a shifter around? If they felt bad killing him for whatever reason, they should have just left him to bleed out and return to the soil. That was the terrifying and relentless way that nature worked. Not that he'd cared about the life cycle when he'd seen Patton injured. A low sigh made him freeze, and he slowly turned his head to see there was, in fact, a human in the room. Patton was curled up in a cozy armchair, a worn storybook sliding off his lap, and one leg tucked up against him. The other was laid straight out on a footrest, the pant leg rolled up and the skin bandaged thoroughly. Virgil stared. Were these humans insane, leaving one of their injured in the same room as the strange wolf? He abruptly realized which form he was in, looking down at his pale flesh, and all the pieces clicked into place. With a sword like his, Roman was a hunter, and there was only one reason hunters kept monsters alive, as he knew personally. His breath quickened, head becoming foggy with panic. He had to get out of here. As though summoned by the rebellious thought, he heard light footsteps from down the hall. He tore out of the blankets, scrambling to his feet, and noting with mild hysteria that he was wearing soft, button-up pajamas. Patton blinked blearily, looking up at him with confusion. "What?" The footsteps sped up at the noise, and Virgil grabbed Patton's arm, yanking him out of the chair and in front of him as another human appeared in the hall's threshold. Roman, surprisingly with his sword sheathed. He wouldn't need it yet, though, would he? Patton stumbled on his weak leg, and Virgil kept his face stone-cold as he shifted his leg to subtly support the man's weight. "What? Huh?" Patton asked, and Virgil wrapped an arm loosely around his throat, claws hovering above the skin in lieu of an answer. "Don't take another step," Virgil instructed, trying to keep the shake from his voice as he watched Roman take in the situation. "Or I'll bite him." The human's face darkened instantly, as he had expected. Humans never took well to their own being turned. "Let Patton go." Virgil barked out a sharp laugh, eyes wild. "Not a chance." Patton shifted awkwardly on his foot. Kiddo, you don't have to." "Stop talking." Virgil cut him off, not wanting to hear the fear, disgust, faux sympathy in his voice. He couldn't afford to let himself soften. "I'm going to move to the door, and you're coming with. Or else." I can't walk on this leg. Sorry, kiddo." Patton apologized sheepishly, as though he wasn't being held hostage. Shit, how was he supposed to keep him from injuring his leg further without giving away that he was supporting him? Virgil froze up for a moment too long, and then Roman took a step forward, and he knew his bluff had failed. "Look, it's okay, just—" Roman started, advancing, and was cut off by the click of the door handle as Logan stood in the hallway, firewood in his arms. A way out. Virgil didn't waste a second, shoving Patton at Roman, who naturally dove to catch him, before charging at Logan head-on. The man blinked, startled, and then sputtered as Virgil knocked all the wood out of his arms, before ducking around him and out the door. There was shouting behind him, but he was already running, ignoring the burn of his wounds until they went numb. Unfortunately, numbness didn't make for good sprinting. It felt like barely no time at all before he went sprawling, hitting the ground and his vision briefly blacking out. Once he awoke, everything seemed to hurt 10 times worse, and it had begun to rain. He forced himself up on hands and knees, crawling to the shelter of the nearest thick tree trunk. He longed for the warmth and comfort of his wolf form, but he knew better than to shift, not when he hadn't gotten far enough to be truly safe, not when they could come to reclaim him at any moment. They could track him down, kill him, but he wouldn't give them what they wanted. Time passed, his vision occasionally darkening, and then he blinked, and another human stood a few paces away. He squinted, wondering which one of them was sent to finish him off. "Salutations," Logan said, crouching to be eye level with him. Virgil didn't speak. "You're going to bleed out if you don't shift back or get those wounds treated." That, at least, got a hoarse chuckle out of him. Nice try, buddy. Logan stared at him expectantly for a moment longer, and then sighed. I'm going to pick you up and walk back to the house. I am aware that you panicked and would like to reassure you that we don't mean you any harm. Quite the opposite, really. Virgil didn't believe it for a second, and when Logan leaned forward, he bared his teeth. To his surprise, the human simply ignored the threat, wrapping his arms around his shoulders and the underside of his knees and lifting him in one motion. He twitched, and Logan stopped moving. I do not want to drop you. Please don't move. We'll be back at the cabin shortly. Virgil didn't respond, too busy staring at Logan's neck, inches away. The human started moving again, as though he wasn't holding a monster right next to the most vulnerable part of his body, as though Virgil couldn't lunge forward and tear out his trachea as easily as he'd attacked that bear. And he was right, wasn't he? Because Virgil couldn't. He should. He really should, even if it took harnessing the spite and fear building within him as a last act of defiance, even if just to hurt them the way they were going to hurt him, to vent how unfair it was that he saved them and ended up captured. He should close the gap between them and ruin Logan's life the way his had been ruined. But he wouldn't. Even imagining the act made everything in him recoil, because despite everything, he still wanted his humans to be alive and happy and together. He wanted Logan to see the stars, and Patton to see his garden's first harvest, and Roman to finally be satisfied with the composition of his songs. He wanted them safe, even if it meant getting rid of a threat like him. As Logan approached the clearing, he wondered absently if this was what having a pack felt like. It was certainly a bittersweet feeling. Patton and Roman were out on the porch. The former sat on the edge of the stairs, and the latter wearing a groove into the wood with his pacing. Virgil could see his hand resting on his sword-hilt, white-knuckled, and felt an astonishing lack of fear. They both looked up as Logan approached, eyes zeroing in on Virgil. "Logan!" "Specs, is he—" "He's conscious, but many of his wounds are reopened. We'll need the first aid kit again." Logan's voice slipped away along with Virgil's grasp on consciousness, and he was out again. When he woke for the second time in the cabin, Roman was there. He was once again laid out on the couch with mounds of knit blankets tucked around him. It was startling how different these humans treated him compared to the last hunter. Maybe they figured they'd get more flies with honey. He shifted, and Roman's head turned at the movement, looking down at him with a surprisingly neutral expression. He was sat on a throne-like chair next to the couch, and his sword was laid across his legs. He followed Virgil's gaze down to it. "Don't worry, this is for Patton, not you," he told him, lips turned up at the edges, and Virgil snapped out of his groggy state as though he'd been hit. "Patton? Why would— Oh no." He leaned forward, trying to convey the honesty of his next words. I didn't bite him. He's not turned. Please don't kill him." It was Roman's turn to reel back, eyebrows raised. No, I know, it was just a joke. Patton has been trying to hover over you all day, and he needs to be off his feet to recover. He's not— I wouldn't— He sighed, holding up a rag that Virgil hadn't noticed in his other hand. "I'm just cleaning the blade, on my honor." Virgil settled back into the couch, injuries stinging. Oh. There was a long pause in which Virgil steadfastly didn't make eye contact. "I don't know how much you remember, but you've been sleeping for around 3 days, not counting your brief escapade," Roman said. "How are you feeling?" Virgil stared at him for a long moment. Was he serious? Bad. Roman's face fell, but anything he was going to say was cut off by Logan entering from the hall, holding a tray of empty dishes. He paused and then nodded at the two of them. "Good to see you awake," he said, passing them by to enter what Virgil assumed was a kitchen. "Give me 1 moment and I will check your injuries. And Roman, please stop indulging in your self-soothing mechanisms. You're making our guest uneasy." Roman grumbled, but finished wiping down the blade and sheathed it as a light clinking sounded from the kitchen. Logan returned a moment later, small kit in hand. Virgil eyed it warily, already dreading what he knew was to come. One checkup later, he was left fairly confused. Logan packed the unused bandages and antiseptic back into the small box, saying something about Patton wanting to visit, apparently satisfied with just tending to Virgil's wounds. He hadn't taken anything from him. Not blood, or hair, or teeth. There was no way Logan, who had mentioned complex magical theories several times in the past, didn't know about the powerful properties of shifters' bodies. He exhaled heavily, some of the stress leaving him. They were just in it for the biggest prize then. That was good, better than he'd expected from humans. It meant he had time. It was just after the new moon, so he had some time before the full moon hit and he was forced to transform. They'd try to get him to transform earlier, he was sure, since they were probably as unhappy about a shifter in their house as he was unhappy to be captured. Still, he was nothing if not stubborn enough to resist whatever they threw at him. If they wanted his pelt, they were going to have to wait him out.